Young and the Restless spoilers, Saturdays, full the 10th of January 2025. Kyle Abbott found himself in an unfamiliar but quietly intoxicating emotional space. Satisfaction without spectacle. For once, the sense of victory he carried was not loud or vindictive, but internal, rooted in the knowledge that his instincts had been right when it mattered most. He had trusted his judgment, followed the inconsistencies others had dismissed, and refused to let sentiment cloud his assessment of danger. In a town where legacy often blinded people to reality, Kyle felt a rare confidence in himself, not because he had defeated someone publicly, but because he had protected his family from being manipulated further. That calm self-assurance marked a subtle shift in him. A step away from being merely Jack Abbott's son and toward becoming a figure who understood that power in Genoa City was often exercised best through restraint and foresight rather than force. While the Abbott household attempted to stabilize after recent turmoil, Kyle allowed himself a moment to acknowledge that he had done something right, something necessary. And that quiet realization strengthened his resolve for whatever came next. Elsewhere in Genoa City, Phyllis Summers was moving through the city with a familiar sense of purpose, her mind already several steps ahead of the people she was watching. Phyllis had never been content to sit on the sidelines, and recent developments had only sharpened her instincts. Kane Ashby had caught her attention, not because he was openly reckless, but because he was being careful in ways that suggested he had something to hide. Phyllis understood that kind of caution intimately. It was the sort that came from knowing one wrong move could unravel everything. She began tracking Kane's routines with a methodical patience that bordered on obsession, noting when he arrived, when he left, who he spoke to, and who he conspicuously avoided. To anyone else, Kane might have looked like a man simply navigating his way through the shifting alliances of Genoa City, but to Phyllis, there was an undercurrent of calculation in his movements that set off alarms. She was not yet sure what she would find, but she was certain of one thing: Kane Ashby was not as detached from recent chaos as he wanted people to believe, and sooner or later, the truth would surface. Phyllis thrived in that space between suspicion and confirmation, and she was more than willing to wait for the moment when Kane made a mistake. At the same time, a seemingly casual encounter at Crimson Lights was setting the stage for a very different kind of reckoning. Holden Novak did not plan to run into Audra Charles that day, but in Genoa City, coincidence often carried the weight of fate. The familiar hum of conversation and the comforting aroma of coffee did little to soften the tension that snapped into place the moment their eyes met. Holden, never particularly skilled at pretending, acknowledged almost immediately that he had avoided telling Claire Newman the full truth about what had happened in Los Angeles. The admission hung between them, heavy with implication, and Audra's reaction was sharp, not with anger alone, but with something closer to wounded pride. She demanded to know why he had treated her so coldly, why he had shut her out as though she were disposable. Holden, for his part, did not deflect the question entirely. Instead, he reminded her that when he first arrived in Genoa City, she had been anything but welcoming, creating distance before he had ever fully understood the rules of the game she was playing. The exchange was not explosive, but it was raw, layered with years of miscommunication and unresolved resentment. Audra's composure cracked just enough to reveal something genuine beneath her usual armor. She admitted that she regretted how things had unfolded, her voice carrying a rare vulnerability as she acknowledged how isolating Genoa City could be for someone like her. In a town defined by old money, inherited loyalties, and long memories, Audra had often felt like an outsider, perpetually misunderstood and judged through the lens of ambition rather than authenticity. She questioned how their friendship, once built on mutual recognition and shared secrets, had deteriorated into suspicion and hostility. Holden's response cut to the heart of the matter. He told her she had been pushing him relentlessly, particularly when it came to Claire. The pressure had felt suffocating, as though Audra were testing how far she could go without consequence. Her immediate reaction was defensive, tinged with disbelief and hurt, as she challenged him on whether Claire truly mattered that much to him, whether she herself had ever meant anything at all. Holden's answer was unexpectedly honest. He told her that he had liked her better when she was Audra Cortez, the artist, the woman driven by expression rather than control. That distinction landed hard because it framed Audra's transformation not as growth, but as a loss of something essential. The conversation drifted, inevitably, back to the darkest thread binding them together, the memory of disposing of the art gallery owner's body, a secret that had fused them in guilt and silence. It was in that shadowed context that Holden finally laid out his terms. If Audra swore to leave Claire alone, truly and completely, he would keep quiet about the past. No half measures, no manipulation from the sidelines. Audra, after a long pause that suggested she was weighing not just the deal but the version of herself she wanted to be, agreed. She said she would step back, acknowledging that perhaps she had been wrong to believe their friendship was beyond repair. The agreement was not sealed with warmth or renewed trust, but with a mutual understanding of boundaries drawn by fear, regret, and the shared knowledge that some secrets could never survive exposure. By the time the day wound down, Genoa City felt like a chessboard mid-game, pieces subtly repositioned while no one was looking. Kyle's quiet confidence signaled a generational shift within the Abbott family. Phyllis's watchful pursuit of Kane hinted at revelations yet to come. And the fragile truce between Audra and Holden reshaped alliances in ways that would ripple outward. Nothing had exploded, no scandal had yet broken the surface, but the tension beneath it all was unmistakable. In this town, moments of apparent calm were often the most dangerous because they were when deals were made, loyalties tested, and futures quietly rewritten, setting the stage for consequences that would soon demand to be faced. At the Genoa City Athletic Club, the evening carried its usual veneer of sophistication, but beneath the low lighting and polished surfaces, tension moved quietly from one table to the next. Phyllis Summers spotted Kane Ashby almost immediately at the bar, his posture closed off, his focus narrowed to the glass in his hand as if the rest of the room no longer existed. She approached him with the kind of confidence that came from years of knowing exactly how to needle people who wanted to be left alone. She leaned in, teasing him with an easy familiarity that suggested concern disguised as provocation, asking what had happened since the last time she had seen him and implying, with a half smile, that he looked like a man carrying far more than he was willing to admit. Kane's response was sharp and defensive. He told her bluntly that she should stay away from him and everyone else, as if distance alone could simplify the mess closing in around him. Phyllis, unfazed, countered that she was a good person, that she genuinely cared about him, and that curiosity was not a crime when it came from concern. She began talking rapidly, weaving in references to Aristotle Dumas and broader rumors circulating through Genoa City, testing Kane's reactions with each word. Kane cut her off, insisting that he was not Dumas, that he did not care about the speculation or the games people were playing, and that all he wanted was to drink in peace. With that, he abandoned the bar and moved to a dining table, hoping physical distance might finally end the conversation. It did not. Phyllis followed him without hesitation, declaring that she would not be chased away by his abrasive attitude and making it clear that she had no intention of respecting the boundary he was trying to draw. The frustration in Kane's expression deepened, but so did his need to talk, and in a moment of emotional surrender, he told her about Lily Winters. He admitted that they had talked, that the conversation had reopened wounds neither of them had truly healed, and that it had ended in a kiss that left him more confused than comforted. Phyllis listened closely as he continued, explaining that Lily had then told him she was leaving town, a revelation that hit him harder than he wanted to admit. He described the experience as Lily opening a door just long enough for him to see what might have been, only to slam it shut in his face, leaving him standing alone in the hallway of unresolved feelings. Phyllis did not miss the opportunity to reframe the situation. She characterized Lily as self-righteous, as someone who thrived on moral superiority while quietly enjoying the power of being pitied. She challenged Kane directly, asking how long he planned to keep playing Lily's game and casting himself as the perpetual offender while she controlled the emotional terms. Kane pushed back, accusing Phyllis of misunderstanding the situation and insisting that Lily was leaving town because of him, because being around him made everything harder. The weight of that admission pressed down on him, and he snapped, asking Phyllis for just 1 minute of peace. His plea was less anger than exhaustion, the sound of a man stretched thin by guilt, regret, and the constant sense that every choice he made only tightened the knot around him. Phyllis refused to retreat. She told him she had always been there for him, whether he acknowledged it or not, and that he needed to stop pretending he was navigating this alone. She painted a picture of possibility, suggesting that together they could take on anything, even the world itself, if he would just stop hesitating and see what was right in front of him. Before Kane could respond, his phone vibrated in his hand, the interruption jarring in its timing. The message was from his daughter, and as he read it, whatever composure he had left drained from his face. She told him she had spoken to Charlie and made it clear that she did not want any more contact. No calls, no texts, a clean, deliberate severing of communication. Kane stared at the screen, absorbing the finality of it, the realization that the fractures in his personal life were no longer abstract or fixable with time. When he finally looked up, his voice was quieter, stripped of its earlier edge. He told Phyllis that Jack had reached out to him about a potential partnership, a development that added yet another layer of complication to a night already heavy with consequence. The revelation hung between them, suggesting new alliances, new power plays, and new risks at a moment when Kane felt least equipped to handle them. In that single exchange at the GCAC, personal heartbreak, professional opportunity, and unresolved tension converged, leaving Kane caught between what he was losing and what he might be forced to become next, while Phyllis watched closely, fully aware that moments like this were where the future of Genoa City quietly began to shift. At the GCAC, the air was thick with the kind of muted luxury that pretended nothing truly ugly ever happened in Genoa City, even though the ground beneath that polished floor had been soaked in decades of secrets. Kane was still sitting with Phyllis when the next shift in the night walked through the door in the form of Billy Abbott and Sally Spectra. From across the room, Billy clocked the scene in an instant. Kane hunched over with that exhausted rigidity of a man who had just absorbed one blow too many. Phyllis leaning in with that relentless mix of concern and manipulation she wore like perfume. Billy's gut tightened because he knew that any conversation between those two in this moment was not casual. And whatever they were saying could very easily bleed over into the larger war he and Jack were trying to survive. He needed to know what was being plotted without becoming part of the spectacle. So when Sally, curious and already reading the tension, asked what he was doing, he fed her lies so smoothly even he almost believed it. He told her he had to catch Phyllis for a quick clarification about the so-called AI deal, that he needed to make sure she understood there was no arrangement in place, no secret alliance with Aristotle Dumas to be worried about, and that he had told Phyllis to meet him later at the jazz club. It was a plausible pretext, one that fit with the rumors swirling around town, and it gave him the cover he needed to slip away from Sally's questions without tipping his hand. Billy moved carefully through the room, angling his path so that he ended up behind a column just close enough to catch Phyllis's voice. Years of gambling, lying, and half-truths had left him with a finely tuned sense for where to stand when he didn't want to be seen. From his vantage point, he could see Kane's profile, tense and closed off, and Phyllis's animated posture, all restless energy and sharp intent. He listened as she pressed Kane about his pain, about Lily, about how everyone in this town seemed eager to push him to the margins and pretend their own sins were smaller than his. But then the conversation slid into territory that made Billy's shoulders stiffen. Phyllis stopped just commiserating and began outlining ambition. Beneath the protective language, beneath the talk of helping Kane reclaim his power, she framed a vision where Newman Enterprises was no longer under Victor's grip, where she and Kane could take advantage of the cracks forming in the Newman empire and pry it loose for themselves. It wasn't just idle fantasy. She spoke with the ferocity of someone who had survived enough humiliations at Victor's hands to be done playing on the edges. To Kane, she painted it like a shared crusade, a way for him to redirect his pain, to prove he was not the man everyone had decided he would always be. To Billy, listening unseen, it sounded like a dangerous new vector in a war that was already threatening to spiral out of control. Phyllis, with her talent for chaos, aligning with a wounded Kane to take back Newman Enterprises was not something he or Jack needed in the mix right now. Not when Victor was already using AI as a weapon and the Abbotts were scrambling just to keep Jabot intact. He stored every word away, knowing he would have to decide later whether to confront Phyllis, warn Jack, or let the threat hang in the air as one more variable in a game that already had too many. While that quiet spying unfolded under the dim lights of the club, another battlefront was being prepared back at the Abbott mansion. Jack returned home carrying the weight of the day like a second coat over his shoulders. The house, for all its warmth and history, felt more and more like a command center these days. A place where family dinners turned into work councils and every conversation seemed to circle back to Victor Newman and the AI program that had shifted the balance of power. Diane met him with that look she had perfected since their reconciliation, a mix of concern for the man she loved and calculation about the world they were trying to navigate together. Jack told her what he had done, that he had reached out to Kane to ask the question they had both been circling around, whether Kane had any proof in logs, any code fragments, any traceable pattern that showed Victor had used the artificial intelligence system as a weapon against Arabesque. Arabesque had become a cautionary tale in their world, a test case in how far Victor was willing to go when he had a digital predator at his disposal. Kane, who had been instrumental in building that weaponized architecture, had admitted regret, told Jack he never should have created something that could be twisted into a tool for sabotage and control. Jack repeated Kane's words to Diane, emphasizing that sense of guilt, that awareness that he had unleashed something he could no longer manage. And Diane immediately seized on the strategic opening in that emotional confession. She asked Jack whether Kane was still in recovery mode, still licking his wounds and trying to bind up the damage Victor had done to his life, or whether he was ready to reframe that regret into action, to actively help them push back against the man who now controlled the system he regretted building. Jack didn't get the chance to answer. Before he could explain the hesitations in Kane's voice, or the way his regret was tangled up with fear and responsibility, Kyle came into the room with a kind of urgency that made both his parents look up immediately. He didn't waste time with politeness or preamble. He told them they had something now, a counterplay, their last trump card. He said he had been working with the Abbott security team not just to protect their own assets, but to monitor what was happening in the Newman orbit, and that their patience had yielded something unexpected. A man from Sharon and Nick's past had resurfaced, a malignant figure whose name carried the weight of trauma and unresolved fear and had started harassing them again. Security, tasked with keeping an eye on Nick, had tracked his movements and ended up witnessing something they hadn't planned for, a car accident that occurred with that man inside the vehicle. They had responded quickly, called an ambulance, made sure Nick got medical attention. When Diane, her instincts honed by years of surviving blowback, asked the obvious follow-up "what about the other man?" Kyle's answer shifted the entire energy in the room. The other man, he said, had walked away from the crash in far better shape than anyone expected. Newman's security might have thought they had contained him. They had not. Abbott's team had intervened. He told them the man who had survived, the man who had been in the car with Nick, wasn't just some random stalker dredged up from Sharon's past. He was, in Kyle's words, enemy number one of the Newman family. Jack's mind jumped ahead of the explanation, already piecing together who that could be. But before his thoughts could settle, Kyle moved to action. He took out his phone and called in the Abbott security team who were waiting nearby, telling them it was time. A moment later, footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Jack and Diane watched as the men they trusted to protect their home walked in with someone between them. The figure they guided forward was restrained but defiant, his posture broadcasting contempt even before his face came fully into the light. When it did, Jack felt the world pitch sideways. It was Matt Clark. There was no mistaking him, not with the history carved into the lines of his face, not with the knowledge of everything he had done, everything he represented. For Jack, it was like watching a ghost step into his living room. He had believed, as so many in Genoa City had believed, that Matt was dead. A problem erased by time and distance and the brutality of the choices people like Victor made when loose ends threatened to unravel them. But here he was breathing, staring, radiating hostility and a kind of wild amusement at their shock. Jack's reaction broke through the practiced calm he usually tried to maintain. He snapped, telling Matt he thought the man had been dead, that it made more sense than this nightmare of seeing him standing here. Matt, never one to miss an opportunity to twist perception, responded with scorn, insisting that they all were insane, that they were chasing ghosts and conspiracies that didn't exist. He claimed, as he had before, that his name was Mitch Bacall, that he had come to Genoa City for one reason only, to find his wife. He said it with the faux sincerity of someone who had long ago learned that the best lies were the ones you could repeat with absolute conviction. To anyone without context, it might have sounded almost reasonable. To Jack, who now had the testimony of security, the knowledge of Nick's crash, and his own long memory of what Matt Clark had done and what he was capable of, it was laughable. His "sure, of course you are" came out not as belief, but as a bitter acknowledgement of how little Matt had changed. The man still thought he could rewrite reality just by asserting a different version of it. But this time, Jack held a card he had never had before: possession. Matt was on Abbott ground, under Abbott control, and that meant Jack had a rare opportunity. The war with Victor had entered a realm where code and AI had become just as dangerous as corporate espionage and financial sabotage. Victor had something: they needed control of a weaponized digital system that had already been turned on one company and could easily be turned on Jabbo next. Jack needed leverage strong enough to force Victor to the table, something even the great Victor Newman could not shrug off or spin away. Matt Clark, alive and in their custody, was that leverage. Jack took out his phone, his decision already made. Diane and Kyle watched, understanding fully the weight of the moment. Jack called Victor directly, not hiding behind intermediaries or lawyers. When Victor answered, Jack's voice was steadier than he felt. He told his old enemy exactly what he had, making no attempt to soften the blow. He said he was holding Matt Clark right there in his home. He let the implication sit, knowing that on the other end of the line, Victor would be doing the brutal arithmetic of risk, exposure, and the ghosts he had thought safely buried. Then Jack added the line that shifted the dynamic of their entire war. Maybe, he said, it was time they made a deal. In that instant, the sprawling chaos of recent events, drone surveillance, Nick's car accident, Kane's regrets, Phyllis's ambitions, Kaya's quiet investigative work, the AI that had become a month's turnaround into a single, volatile point of contact between two men who had spent their lives trying to outplay each other. Jack had finally found something Victor could not ignore. Victor, for the first time in a long time, would be forced to choose between maintaining control of his latest weapon and containing a living, breathing reminder of just how far he had gone in the past. And somewhere between them, Matt Clark stood as both victim and architect of the chaos, a man whose refusal to stay dead had now made him the most dangerous bargaining chip in Genoa City.